The scream vanished into the Alaskan wilderness, swallowed by the howling wind and the thick veil of snow that blanketed everything in sight. The night sky above Ketchum Ridge shimmered faintly with ribbons of green and violet from the aurora borealis, dancing silently over the dark forest below. The town was small, isolated, and used to the sounds of the wild. Wolves howling, branches cracking, the moan of the wind through frozen pines. But this sound had been different. It had been human. Somewhere out there in the black expanse of wilderness, something terrible had happened. Ranger David Keller had been patrolling the forest road when his headlights caught something unusual. A pair of tire tracks swerving violently off the icy path. He stopped his truck, stepped out into the biting wind, and followed the tracks with his flashlight beam slicing through the snow. The road dipped, and there it was. A dark pickup truck half buried in snow, its headlights dimming, the engine still running weakly as if it had only been left moments ago. The driver's door was wide open, rocking slightly in the wind. Keller's breath came out in short bursts of mist as he approached. The first thing he noticed was the blood, thin streaks of it, frozen into a dark trail that led away from the vehicle and disappeared into the tree line. Inside the truck, the heat was still on low, humming softly. A woman's purse sat on the passenger seat, dusted with frost. Her ID card was half sticking out of it. The name read Lena Harrow, 28 years old. Keller's stomach tightened. He recognized the name from the report that came over the radio 2 days ago. A missing environmental researcher from Anchorage. She had come to Ketchum Ridge alone to document wolf migration patterns and had not been heard from since. He looked around the interior of the truck, searching for clues. The glove box was open, papers scattered. The passenger floorboard was soaked with melted snow, mixed with what looked like mud or maybe blood. On the dashboard lay a small spiral notebook, its pages swollen from moisture. Keller picked it up carefully. The handwriting was neat at first, scientific observations about animal tracks, temperatures, and weather patterns. But as he flipped through the pages, the writing grew erratic, the lines shaky. The last entry was scribbled across the page, written over and over again in the same uneven scrawl. "They're watching me." Keller's skin prickled. He stepped out of the truck, scanning the silent forest. The snow had started falling harder now, soft flakes swirling in the glow of his flashlight. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of his boots, the low hum of the idling engine, the faint rustle of branches shifting under the weight of snow. He radioed back to base, trying to raise dispatch, but only static came through. The storm had likely cut the signal. He tried again, tapping the mic in frustration, but nothing. He moved around to the back of the truck. The bed was empty except for a broken tripod, a roll of duct tape, and a torn parka sleeve. The edge of the sleeve was crusted with frozen blood. Kneeling, Keller studied the ground. The snow was disturbed in wide arcs, as though there had been a struggle. Then a few yards beyond, he saw prints, bare footprints. Small, delicate, sinking deep into the powder. They weren't animal prints. They were human. And whoever had left them had been running. Keller followed the tracks cautiously, hand near his holster. The forest loomed around him, thick and dark. The trees creaked in the cold, their trunks black against the snow. He could feel the temperature dropping fast. The tracks zigzagged through the trees, then abruptly stopped at the edge of a frozen creek. There was blood here, too, a thin smear across the ice leading toward the opposite bank. He shined his flashlight there and caught sight of something, a scrap of red fabric snagged on a branch. "Lena?" He called out, his voice echoing strangely. The wind answered back, carrying his words away. He tried again, louder this time, but there was only silence. Then, faintly, he thought he heard something, a low, distant groan like someone in pain. He strained to listen, but the sound vanished as quickly as it came. He crossed the creek carefully, his boots sliding slightly on the ice. On the far side, he found more signs of a struggle. Branches snapped, snow churned up. He found a camera lens half buried under the ice, cracked and broken. It must have been Lena's. The direction of the track suggested she had been dragged or chased deeper into the woods. Keller hesitated. The snow was coming down harder now, threatening to erase everything. He had to make a choice: follow the trail and risk getting lost himself, or return to the truck and wait for backup that might not arrive. He decided to go on. He moved deeper into the trees, his flashlight beam cutting through the swirling snow. The forest was suffocatingly quiet except for the wind groaning through the branches. Every now and then he caught glimpses of movement in the distance, a shadow slipping between trees too tall to be an animal. He told himself it was a trick of the light, the wind, his imagination playing games, but his instincts said otherwise. About half a mile from the creek he found an old cabin. The roof sagged under the snow, the windows boarded up, the door hanging crooked on one hinge. It looked abandoned, but the snow in front of it had been disturbed recently. Someone had been here. Keller approached slowly, heart pounding, flashlight steady. He pushed the door open. Inside was darkness and the stench of rot. He stepped in cautiously, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The cabin's interior was cluttered. Broken furniture, a rusted stove, and in one corner, what looked like old camping gear. He swept the flashlight across the walls and froze. Scratched into the wood were symbols. Circles intersected with jagged lines, crude drawings of wolves and human figures surrounded by eyes. Beneath one of the drawings was something that made his stomach twist. It was a photograph pinned to the wall with a knife. The photo showed Lena Harrow smiling, standing beside her truck, the same one Keller had just found. Across her face, someone had drawn a red X in marker. A sudden creak behind him made him spin around, gun drawn, but there was nothing. The wind had blown the door shut. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the air felt colder now, heavier. He thought he saw movement again, something in the shadows near the back of the room. Slowly he moved the flashlight that way, and for a split second, he saw eyes reflecting the light. Not animal eyes, human. Then they were gone. Keller backed out of the cabin, breath quick and shallow. The snow had already begun to cover his tracks. He turned toward the direction of the truck, but the forest looked different now. Darker, the paths unfamiliar. He tried his radio again, desperate this time, but still only static. His flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere behind him a branch snapped. He spun around but saw only the endless stretch of trees. He started walking, faster now, his pulse racing. The snowstorm thickened, erasing landmarks, swallowing sound. For a brief moment he thought he saw a figure standing far off between the trees. Tall, motionless, watching. When he blinked, it was gone. He reached the creek again, but the footprints, his and Lena's, were gone, buried beneath fresh snow. Keller realized then that he wasn't alone. Someone else had been here the entire time, watching him, waiting. He raised his flashlight and called out again, voice trembling against the wind. "Who's there?" His words were devoured by the storm. No answer, just the soft hiss of snow falling. He backed toward the truck, every nerve in his body on fire, the forest pressing in from all sides. When he finally reached the road, the truck's headlights were out. The engine had died. He climbed inside, slamming the door behind him, and tried the ignition. Nothing. The battery was dead. He looked through the windshield into the forest. For a long moment he saw nothing but snow and darkness. Then, just before he killed the flashlight to conserve power, he saw something standing at the tree line. Tall, broad, unmoving. Watching him, Keller sat frozen, the silence thick and suffocating. He reached for the notebook again, thumbing through the damp pages. The last words stared back at him like a warning, written in Lena's frantic hand. "They're watching me." And in that moment, Keller finally understood. She hadn't been imagining things. Whatever had been watching her was now watching him. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving a white, untouched stillness across Ketchum Ridge. The storm had silenced everything. No sound of wildlife. No distant hum of snowmobiles, just a thick, eerie calm that hung over the valley. When Detective Isla Warren arrived from Anchorage, the air still smelled of frost and pine. She was a woman who didn't scare easily. Someone who had seen too many bodies and too many lies, yet even she felt something wrong in this place. The wilderness here was too quiet, too watchful, as if holding its breath. Warren stepped out of the helicopter as the blades slowed to a stop, snow swirling around her boots. She met Ranger Keller by the truck he had found the night before. The vehicle was half buried in snow now, the driver's door still open, the interior frozen solid. The blood on the ground had turned to thin black ice. Keller briefed her on everything he'd seen. The footprints, the abandoned cabin, the strange symbols carved into the walls. Warren listened without interrupting, her sharp gray eyes scanning the forest beyond the road. Inside the truck, she examined the scene carefully. She noticed details Keller had missed. The faint handprint on the inside of the windshield, as if someone had pressed against the glass in panic, and a small torn piece of flannel shirt caught in the door hinge. She bagged it quickly and turned to the notebook he had recovered. The writing inside fascinated her. It wasn't just fear written in those final lines. There were fragments of coordinates, sketches of wolves, and something that looked like a map. Lena Harrow hadn't just been researching animal migration. She had been tracking something specific, something she hadn't dared name. They decided to start at the last known location from Lena's GPS data. Her team back in Anchorage had managed to retrieve the last signal ping before her device went dead. It came from a cabin about 5 miles north, deep in the valley. Locals called the area Deadfall Woods, a place avoided even by hunters. Rumors said it was haunted, cursed, or worse, home to things that preferred the dark. Warren didn't believe in curses, but she had learned long ago that places could hold memories of violence like stains that never washed away. The journey through the snow was slow and grueling. The sun never rose fully that day, staying low on the horizon, painting the forest in pale gold and long shadows. Keller led the way, rifle slung over his shoulder. The other officers, 2 from the Anchorage Field Unit and 1 local deputy, followed silently. The radio connection was weak, their voices breaking up every time they tried to contact base. When they reached the cabin, Warren immediately knew it was the same one Keller had described. The sagging roof, the broken windows, the door hanging loose on its hinges, it all matched. But in the daylight, it looked even worse, like something ancient and sick, rotting slowly in the cold. The wind moaned through the cracks in the wood as they stepped inside. The stench hit them first, stale air mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the faint scent of decay. Warren covered her mouth and turned on her flashlight. Inside, the scene looked like it hadn't been touched in years, except for the scattered modern equipment. There were maps on the table, lenses, field notebooks, and 2 trail cameras, one smashed, one still intact. She picked up the unbroken camera carefully, checking its SD card slot. It was empty. Someone had taken the footage. The walls were worse. The carvings Keller had described were everywhere, symbols etched deep into the wood, overlapping like layers of madness. Some looked like runes, others resembled claw marks, and among them photographs pinned with nails, old black and white shots of hunters, miners, and hikers. All of them were marked with an X over their faces. At the center of the wall hung a single piece of newspaper, yellowed and curling. Warren stepped closer to read the headline, 3 campers missing near Glacier Ridge, no leads found. The date was from 1997. She frowned. That case had been unsolved for over 2 decades. The forest had kept its secrets well. On the floor, one of the officers found a small metal box. Inside were personal items, a pair of earrings, a wedding ring, a broken compass. Warren's stomach twisted. Souvenirs. Whoever had been here had been collecting them. Keller stood silently by the door, his face pale beneath his beard. "This place," he muttered under his breath. "It doesn't feel right." Warren nodded slightly. "Because it isn't. They continued searching the area, moving behind the cabin where the snow was disturbed. Tracks led into the trees, large booted footprints mixed with smaller ones. Warren crouched beside them, her breath fogging in the cold air. She wasn't alone when she died, she murmured. The tracks were too fresh to be from weeks ago, which meant someone had been here recently. Maybe even still was. They followed the tracks for nearly an hour until the forest opened into a clearing. There, half buried in snow, they found something that made everyone stop, a cage. It was made of rusted rebar and animal bones wired together, large enough to trap a person. Inside, frozen solid, were old scraps of clothing and what looked like human hair tangled in the bars. The cage smelled of gasoline and rot. One of the officers gagged and turned away. Warren circled it slowly, scanning every inch. She found scorch marks on the ground as if something had been burned here. "Someone's been hunting," she said softly. "But not for animals." A metallic glint caught her eye. Hanging from a nearby tree branch was a camera lens, cracked but still intact. It was tied there with fishing wire, positioned perfectly to face the cage. Someone had been filming. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. "We're not the first ones to stand here," she said quietly. "He watches. He always watches." They marked the site and radioed the coordinates, but the signal was still too weak to send. The decision was made to camp nearby for the night and attempt contact in the morning. The storm was rolling back in, wind sweeping through the trees with a low, hollow whistle. They set up tents near the clearing, built a small fire, and kept their weapons close. As the night deepened, the forest seemed to come alive again. The crack of branches echoed from the distance. Twice Keller thought he saw movement beyond the firelight, a shadow darting between the trees. He grabbed his rifle, but when he pointed his flashlight, there was nothing there. Only snow and the whisper of the wind through frozen pine needles. Warren sat quietly by the fire, reading Lena's notebook again, her face lit by the flickering flames. She felt drawn to it, as if the pages held the answer to everything. The last few entries weren't just words of fear. They were a timeline of discovery. Lena had found evidence of a hidden trail system, man-made tunnels and strange lights in the valley at night. Her last note mentioned a cave near Bear Creek. The locals called it the Hollow. The name sent a chill through Warren. Every small Alaskan town had a place like that, one steeped in old horror stories that everyone pretended not to believe. Around midnight, a sound broke through the silence, a distant laugh. It was faint, almost human, but stretched too long to be natural. Everyone froze. Keller raised his rifle and scanned the dark tree line, heart hammering in his chest. Warren grabbed her flashlight and swung it toward the sound, but the beam caught nothing but snowflakes drifting lazily through the air. The laughter stopped abruptly, leaving behind an even deeper silence. One of the officers whispered, "That wasn't the wind." Warren didn't respond. Her instincts screamed that they were being watched. She checked her sidearm and motioned for everyone to stay close to the fire. Sleep was impossible. The hours dragged until dawn, every snap of ice or rustle of branches setting nerves on edge. When the first weak light of morning touched the treetops, Warren realized someone was missing. Keller's tent was empty, the flap open, snow drifted inside. His rifle leaned against a tree, untouched. They searched frantically around the camp, calling his name, their voices echoing through the woods. And then they saw them. Footprints leading away from the tent straight toward the direction of the hollow. Warren stared at them, her face pale and hard as the ice underfoot. She didn't say a word. She just picked up her weapon and started following the tracks, knowing deep down that whatever had taken Lena Harrow had now taken Keller too, and this time the forest wouldn't give him back. Detective Isla Warren followed Keller's trail into the gray stillness of dawn, her boots crunching through the crusted snow. The air was brittle and sharp, the kind of cold that burned the lungs and made sound die on the tongue. The forest stretched around her like an endless maze of white and shadow. Each tree looked the same as the last, and the footprints ahead of her twisted through the snow in frantic, uneven paths. She knew Keller hadn't walked willingly. He had been taken. As she pushed deeper into the woods, the light dimmed again. Clouds rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the weak sun. The deeper she went, the more the world felt detached from time. It was as though the wilderness had closed in around her, cutting her off from everything human. The radio on her shoulder crackled faintly, the same static she'd heard for hours. Every attempt to reach her team failed. Somewhere behind her, the forest shifted with soft groans of bending trees and distant cracking branches. The sound was everywhere, yet nowhere. She reached a ravine where the tracks seemed to vanish, swallowed by snowdrift. For a moment she thought she'd lost them until something caught her eye. A dark smear on a tree trunk. She stepped closer. Blood. A handprint. Fingers splayed wide, streaked across the bark. Her chest tightened. Keller's gloves had been black leather. The mark looked too small to be his. It was a woman's hand. Possibly Lena's. Beneath the print, scratched roughly into the bark, was a single symbol, a circle split by a jagged line through its center. She had seen the same one carved inside the cabin walls. It wasn't random. It meant something. She followed the faint traces of blood further downhill until the forest opened to a hollow valley. The ground dipped into a shadowy gorge where an old cave mouth gaped like an open wound in the earth. The smell hit her before she even reached it. Rot, gasoline, and rust. She crouched low behind a fallen log, scanning the area. There were no fresh footprints besides Keller's. Snow had covered most signs of life. She could hear a faint dripping sound from inside the cave. Water, or something thicker. Drawing her weapon, Warren moved forward slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air inside was colder, heavy with moisture and decay. Her light caught on twisted metal, broken wood, and something that shimmered faintly. Ice crystals forming over what looked like bones. The walls were marked again with those same carved symbols overlapping in messy spirals. It looked ritualistic, obsessive. Then she saw him. Keller, hanging from a meat hook driven into a support beam. His head hung forward, his throat cut cleanly from ear to ear. Blood had pooled and frozen beneath him. His ranger's badge was pinned to his chest like a grim decoration. For a moment, Warren couldn't move. Her breath came out in shallow bursts, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. The silence was unbearable. She stepped forward, trembling, her flashlight shaking in her grip. Pinned beside him on the wall were photographs. Lena Harrow. The missing campers from years ago. The miners from the old news clippings, all marked with red X's. Beneath them, written in what looked like blood, were words smeared across the cave wall. The wild takes back what's hers. Her flashlight flickered as she stepped backward, the shadows shifting. Something moved deeper in the cave. A faint shuffle of boots, or maybe an animal. She raised her gun. "This is Detective Isla Warren." Her voice echoed harshly, breaking against the stone. "Come out with your hands up." No response. Just the slow, rhythmic sound of dripping water. She moved closer to the noise, every nerve on edge. Her light fell on an old table. On it lay tools. Knives, a handsaw, and jars filled with what she could only describe as remains. A bone fragment. A torn ear. Hair braided and sealed in glass. It wasn't just murder. It was ritual. Then, faintly, she heard a whisper. It was so quiet she thought it might have been the wind moving through the tunnels. But then it came again, words stretched and uneven. "You shouldn't be here." Her blood ran cold. She spun toward the voice, but the beam caught only the shimmer of frost and stone. The whisper came again, closer this time, almost behind her ear. "You don't belong here." She fired once, the gunshot exploding through the cave, the echo rolling endlessly. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Silence returned. Nothing moved. But now her flashlight beam caught something she hadn't noticed before. A passage leading deeper underground, narrow and jagged. Against her better judgment, she moved toward it. The tunnel grew tighter, forcing her to crouch. The walls closed in, damp and slick. Her breathing grew shallow, echoing too loud in her ears. Then her light fell upon another figure, motionless, lying against the wall. It was a skeleton, long decayed, still wearing a miner's helmet and rusted tools at its side. She recognized the logo on the uniform from the 1950s mining company records. So the old stories had been true. Miners had gone missing here. Only they hadn't been trapped. They had been taken. A sudden clang from behind made her spin. The beam of light shook wildly, catching glimpses of movement. A shadow slipped past the entrance of the tunnel. Heavy footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, crunching on gravel. She could hear the faint creak of metal. Someone dragging something. Her instincts screamed to run, but she forced herself to stay low and silent. She turned off the flashlight, letting her eyes adjust to the faint glow of the cave mouth. The footsteps stopped. Then came a slow exhale, long and steady, as if whoever it was could see her even in the dark. She waited, muscles tensed, ready to fire. But nothing came. The sound faded, footsteps retreating until only the dripping water remained. She switched her light back on, hands trembling, and made her way out of the tunnel. When she reached the main chamber again, Keller's body was gone. The hook was empty, the floor scraped clean. Her stomach turned to ice. Warren stumbled out of the cave into the weak daylight. The forest was silent again. No wind, no birds. Not even the crunch of snow beneath her boots seemed natural anymore. She stopped to catch her breath, scanning the tree line. That was when she saw the outpost. It stood about 100 yards away, half collapsed, its roof sagging under snow. An old ranger's post, abandoned for decades. She approached cautiously, her instincts prickling. The door creaked open at her touch. Inside was a smell of damp wood and decay. Dust floated through the air like tiny ghosts in her flashlight beam. And then she saw the wall. Every inch of it was covered in photographs. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all pinned in neat rows. Some were faded black and white. Others looked recent, glossy, still new. All showed people. Hunters, campers, hikers, researchers, couples smiling in the wild. Every single one had a red X slashed across their faces. At the center of the wall was Lena Harrow's photo, her smiling face defaced with ink and knife cuts. Underneath, a map. The same valley she stood in now, marked with dozens of red circles. It was like looking at a pattern of death stretching across the wilderness. The killer had been at this for years, maybe decades. She ran her gloved fingers over the photographs. Some were dated by hand. 1992, 1997, 2003, 2019. The same handwriting appeared beside each one, a looping script with strange notes. Trespasser, hunter, taken. Warren felt her throat tighten. This wasn't random violence. This was ritual, organized, methodical. Someone was keeping records. The floorboards behind her creaked. She spun around, gun-raised. The door was half open now, snow drifting in. "Show yourself," she barked. The silence pressed back against her voice. Then the door shut slowly on its own, the sound deep and deliberate. Warren took a step back, her pulse pounding in her ears. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. Then came the whisper again, softer this time, right behind her. "You shouldn't have come here." She turned sharply, sweeping the flashlight across the room. No one. Nothing. Only the still photographs watching her from every wall. She could feel eyes on her from somewhere unseen. The feeling was so strong it made her skin crawl. She backed toward the door, every instinct screaming to leave. Outside, snow began to fall again. She ran through the trees, her boots kicking up white clouds. But as she glanced back once more, she saw a figure standing in the doorway of the outpost. A tall shape, unmoving, wearing something like a mask made of bone. She froze for half a heartbeat, staring before the wind picked up and the figure vanished back into the darkness. She didn't stop running until the forest swallowed her completely. The wilderness of Alaska had always been merciless, but now Warren understood something she wished she didn't. It wasn't the wolves or the cold that made this place deadly. It was something older, something that had learned to hunt among the trees, and it had no intention of letting her leave alive. 3 weeks passed before anyone found the outpost. The storm had rolled over the ridge like a living thing, burying the forest beneath another 6 feet of snow. When the rescue chopper finally spotted the blackened remains from the air, it looked like nothing more than a charred scar in a sea of white. The cabin had burned to the ground. No footprints surrounded it. No signs of struggle or survival, only ashes and the faint smell of smoke that still lingered in the frigid air. The investigation team landed nearby, shoveling their way through the ruin. There was almost nothing left but splintered beams and twisted metal. They found fragments of a service pistol melted to its frame, a broken flashlight, and, buried under a beam of scorched timber, a camera. Its outer shell blackened, but the memory card miraculously intact. The footage would later make headlines. It was grainy and shaky, shot in darkness with only a flashlight cutting through the snow. The voice was unmistakable. Detective Isla Warren's, tense and breathless. Her words came in gasps as if she were running. "He's real," she whispered. "He's been here for years." Then static. The final frame froze on her face, turned sharply over her shoulder, eyes wide in terror. Behind her, the faint silhouette of a man, or something that looked like one, stood in the trees. Her body was never recovered. Neither was Ranger Keller's, nor any trace of Lena Harrow beyond her blood. The cave they had entered was sealed off by authorities. But when investigators finally went inside, they found no body, no blood. Not even the carvings Warren had described in her last report. The walls were bare. The chamber was clean. It was as if everything had been erased. The case file marked Ketchum Ridge Incident was transferred to the FBI's Anchorage field office and reopened as part of a broader investigation into 17 disappearances spanning nearly 2 decades across Alaska's interior. The missing included hunters, hikers, tourists, and locals, all vanishing near the same patch of forested land between Ketchum Ridge, Bear Creek, and Glacier Ridge, all without a trace. The media dubbed the unknown killer the Phantom of the Wild. Journalists from Anchorage and Fairbanks descended on the region, digging through local legends and folklore. Old miners' diaries spoke of strange lights in the woods during the 1950s, of men who wandered off in the night and never came back. There were whispers about a man named Owen Lasker, a miner who had gone mad after an avalanche trapped his crew. When rescuers found him weeks later, he was alive but changed. He refused to speak, refused to leave the valley. The day after his release, he vanished into the woods again. Some said he'd become part of the wilderness itself, a ghost, a thing that fed on anyone who dared to intrude on his domain. Locals still tell that story to outsiders in low voices, adding details that change with every retelling. A mask of bone, a cabin made of animal hides, eyes that glowed like glass in the dark. But for the people who lived near Ketchum Ridge, it wasn't just a story. They had heard things. Hunters reported finding gutted carcasses of animals strung up in trees, symbols carved into trunks, campfires still warm but deserted. Some swore they'd seen a tall figure moving through the trees just before dusk, blending with the snow and shadows. Months after Warren's disappearance, when the spring thaw began to break the ice, 2 hikers near Glacier Ridge made a grim discovery. The snow had melted enough to reveal what looked like a torn piece of fabric caught under a fallen branch. When they pulled it free, it turned out to be a blood-stiffened scarf. It matched the one Warren had been wearing in her last known footage. Beneath it, buried shallow in the softening ground, they found a metal badge, Keller's Ranger insignia. The name had been crudely scratched out with something sharp. Attached to the scarf with a bit of frayed string was a note written in faded red ink. The words were smudged but still legible. "The forest keeps its secrets." The discovery reignited public fascination and fear. The FBI dispatched another team to comb through the region. They brought dogs, drones, and satellite imaging equipment. But after 2 weeks of searching, they found nothing. No new evidence, no signs of life. Yet strange things kept happening. The drone footage captured unexplained flickers of light deep in the woods at night. One drone even transmitted a brief image before its signal cut out. A shape standing motionless in the clearing, facing upward toward the camera, before vanishing into static. The drone was never recovered. Ketchum Ridge became a place people avoided. Once it had been a quiet stop for loggers and wildlife photographers. Now the cabin stood empty, doors broken open by wind and snow. Tourists stopped coming. The few remaining residents packed up and left, abandoning their properties. Nature began reclaiming the town. Roofs collapsed under snow weight, signs rusted and fell, and the roads disappeared under ice and moss. It was as if the land was swallowing its own history. But every so often new stories emerged. A bush pilot flying low over the ridge claimed he saw movement, a faint orange glow in the trees like the flicker of a campfire. A research team stationed miles away reported hearing faint laughter carried on the wind during a storm. One snowmobiler swore he saw a woman walking barefoot through the snow, her face pale and eyes wide, vanishing when he called out to her. He later identified her from a photo. It was Lena Harrow. Forensic analysts continued to study the footage from Warren's camera, slowing it frame by frame. In one sequence, just before the static, a shape behind her could be seen more clearly. A man, tall, draped in dark animal skin clothing. His head was covered by something resembling a skull mask, antlers curling outward like twisted branches. When the light hit the eyes, they reflected not like human eyes but like glass or metal. One analyst swore he saw movement in the background of another frame, suggesting multiple figures, not one. If that was true, the Phantom of the Wild wasn't working alone. By late summer, the case went cold again. Files were boxed and stored. The investigation into the disappearances was quietly closed, officially listed as unsolved presumed environmental fatalities. The public moved on, but in the quiet corners of Alaska, where the wilderness stretches untouched for miles and the nights are longer than memory, the story never died. A trapper passing through Ketchum Ridge one autumn evening claimed he saw light moving in the forest, like a camera flash. He thought maybe tourists had returned, foolish enough to camp where so many had vanished. But when he went closer, he found no one. Only a clearing filled with animal bones arranged in circles, and a single metal tag hanging from a branch, engraved with the number 17. The wind rose suddenly, carrying with it a sound that almost resembled a human laugh. The trapper left his gear behind and never came back. Even years later, pilots flying overhead sometimes report strange lights below during storms. Small, flickering and rhythmic, like someone signaling. And occasionally, after a fresh snowfall, rangers find lone footprints in places where no one should have been, too far from any road or trail. Always one set, always leading deeper into the woods, never out. To this day, the locals warn outsiders about the ridge. They say the wilderness there isn't empty. They say the trees remember, the earth remembers, and that every sound that echoes through those frozen valleys has meaning. They tell travelers not to stop when they hear laughter in the snow, and never under any circumstance to answer when someone whispers their name in the dark. And still, on the coldest nights when the aurora paints the sky green and blue, some people swear they see a faint light flicker deep within the forest, a glint of glass like a camera lens catching the glow. It appears for only a second, then disappears as if someone or something is still watching. The wilderness of Alaska has always been vast and merciless, but in that stretch of land where Warren, Keller, and Lena vanished, the silence feels different. It isn't the calm of untouched nature, but something deeper, older, and aware. Those who have been near it say it feels like standing inside a held breath, waiting for something to move. And though time has buried the evidence and the snow has erased the tracks, one truth lingers like a warning carved into the ice. In Alaska, It's not the animals you should fear. It's what has learned to hunt among them. What watches when you think you're alone and what never lets its secrets leave the woods alive.